Welcome back to another Prehistoric Planet review, this time looking at the penultimate episode of the series, Ice Worlds. I predicted at the end of my last review that a return to a more firmly defined environment would see an increase in the overall quality of the episode. And I was not disappointed. A significant step up from fresh water, Ice Worlds follows the change of the seasons in the far north and the far south, and how dinosaurs both take advantage of times of plenty and endure the worst of the polar winters. We begin at the very end of winter in the Arctic Circle. A lone dromaeosaur awakens in the lingering darkness. Starved from the prolonged periods of cold, she sets her sight on a beetle, and is able to snatch it in flight thanks to her incredible agility. The first rays of the springtime sun emerge from the Arctic horizon, and the dromaeosaurs gather to hunt. They are presented with an opportunity as a huge herd of Edmontosaurus pass through the valley. As they come to a barely frozen river, they hesitate to cross. Seizing their chance, the dromaeosaurs rush the herd, which panics. During the river crossing, some of the young hadrosaurs get swept up in the river's current. While one manages to escape and return to its mother, another succumbs to the forces of the water, providing the dromaeosaurs with an early spring feast. Of all the cold openings, this one is one of the stronger ones in terms of story. It's a bit longer and more focused, although I do have to admit to getting a little weary from all the baby death. Not that I have any kind of principled objection to it. This is nature. Hell, this is fake nature. But after so much, it does come across as a somewhat cheap way to provoke the audience, a strategy that diminishes with each new infant fatality. Infatality? Anyway, what I'm saying is you can't just keep killing babies forever and expect it to have the same impact. Fortunately, the baby death here is more ancillary, and the young hadrosaur we actually follow does survive, so that's a nice change of pace. As spring unfolds, ornithomimus gather on islands of sand deposited by rivers. These are males, and they're here to win the attention of females. Not by fighting or dancing, but by building the most attractive nest, a strategy employed by many birds today. But nest building for the ornithomimus isn't as straightforward as it may seem. They have to chase away hungry hadrosaurs that see their nest material as food, and they also have to keep an eye out for nest thieves. Late arriving males will steal material from other nests to make up for the lack of availability. It's a short segment, but efficiently effective because it has a fair bit going on. The stealing behavior is no doubt based on similar behavior seen by Adelie penguins, which also build nests to attract a mate, though they use pebbles. In fact, Attenborough himself narrated this exact phenomenon for Frozen Planet in 2011. This might come across as a bit too familiar to those who've seen it before, but it's not as if it can be ruled out, and it makes sense in terms of the character's motivations. The thieving male has a decent amount of personality, and it's funny to see his antics as he tries to look unassuming before the other males turn their backs. Like their cousin, Dinachirus, ornithomimus are silly-looking with their tiny heads, so it makes sense to use them in more comedic moments. This scene is also a nice contrast to the tone of the last. Elsewhere in the Arctic, the magnificently crested Alloro titan travel to volcanic valleys to use the geothermically heated soil as a natural incubator for their eggs, a behavior rooted in fossils of dinosaur eggs found in volcanic sediments. We see the young hatchlings in the first moments of life, and are then treated to a time-lapse showing the herd moving across the valley, feeding on nutritious horsetails. But these very same warm and hospitable conditions work against the hadrosaurs. They are excellent breeding grounds for mosquitoes, which swarm in their millions. The insects are so irritating that it prevents the Alloro titan from feeding. We see their faces, which are nearly covered by the mosquitoes. But things are even worse for the young, who are engulfed head to tail. The mosquitoes suck so much blood from one calf that it's unable to even stand up. As the herd makes for higher elevation in search of relief, they leave the poor thing behind. But just as all seems lost, we see the determined calf limp weakly over the rocks and rejoin its family. This is an excellent scene, understated but dramatic. The inclusion of the geothermal incubators is a welcome inclusion, and turning insects into the story's, quote, antagonists, unquote, is both a brilliant subversion and a nod to reality, seeing as how caribou have to deal with the same problem today. It's great to see the giant dinosaurs menaced by the tiny insects to the point where they pose a credible threat. And finally, we have an instance where the baby actually lives. This moment might have felt a bit too saccharine if not for all the infant mortality the show had already shown us, making this moment feel more than earned. Dramatic, perilous, heartwarming. This segment's got it all. In the hottest parts of the Arctic summer, the day-long sunlight creates extremely dry conditions, perfect for forest fires. Back in North America, we see troodontids taking advantage of these fires, stalking along the edges and snatching helpless animals trying to flee the spreading flames. Fairly standard fare, but then the troodontid does something that will absolutely astonish some people. It picks up a stick with a shining red ember on one side and brings it to a section where the fire hasn't spread yet. Dinosaurs using fire to hunt may seem like straight-up science fiction, but in fact, modern raptors do this today. First Nations Australians have observed the behavior going back thousands of years, and it was first photographed in 2018. As the fire worsens, terrified mammals scamper through the underbrush, only for one to be caught by the avian arsonist. It's a phenomenal bit of behavior to showcase and will no doubt amaze many viewers. However, I do wish that the segment had spent more time developing the character of the troodontid. Attenborough tells us about its intelligence, but until the pyromaniacal bit, we don't actually see any of that intelligence on display. It would have really helped this character, which is already visually distinct thanks to the crazy hairdo of black and white feathers, stand out more from the rest of the cast. The fires mark the end of summer, and autumn begins to set in. As the season changes, we move all the way to the other side of the planet to see how dinosaurs in the Antarctic deal with the changing times. A forest in Antarctica harbors a trio of young Antarctopelta traveling together for safety and looking for a place to wait out the worst of the coming winter. Returning to the same den that they've always used, they find they've grown too large for all three to fit inside. The fraternal bonds sever, and the ousted brother goes it on his own, looking for his own territory. He passes by a small group of hadrosaurs heading north in the opposite direction to find greener and warmer pastures to wait out the oncoming cold. But the lone Antarctopelta heads south, all by himself. He finds a cave whose ceiling is alight with bioluminescent fungus gnat larvae. As he settles down, comfortable and accompanied by the living ceiling, the snow begins to fall. Another understated segment, I do like that we get to see things in the Antarctic, though our stay here is too brief. The story here is very simple, but for the most part it works. The only thing I think would have made it stronger is if we had a slight moment to focus on the Antarctopelta's reaction to being abandoned by his brothers. Nothing much, mind, but remembering the previous episode's ability to convey so much emotion and character without anthropomorphization, it feels like they could have done more here. I'm also wondering if it would have made sense to end the segment right as the Antarctopelta is passing the hadrosaurs. As he moves in the opposite direction, heading into where he knows it will be coldest, it would have left his fate ambiguous, and possibly more tantalizing. This is the first episode to have what can properly be called a grand finale. We return to the Arctic once more to meet up with a herd of the Centrosaurian ceratopsian Pachyrhinosaurus. It's the tail end of the autumn rut, and some of the lower-ranking males are still testing their strength against one another. This is a time of vulnerability for them. They've had little time to eat or rest, and at least one is bearing a wound on his thigh. A wound that I have to say seems just a bit too similar to the wound the male T-Rex had in the last episode, right down to it being on the same thigh. And matters are made all the worse when we hear a distant call echo through the forest. Nanoxaurus are on the prowl. I should note that these Nanoxaurus are based on the idea that Nanoxaurus was a polar dwarf, but more recent analyses show that the known specimens of Nanoxaurus are immature, and it probably grew larger than previously thought. Oh well, let's just pretend these are adolescents. As they approach the Pachyrhinosaurus, the herd moves out into the open in order to be better able to defend themselves. They close ranks looking outwards so that their formidable skulls face their attackers. It's similar to behavior seen in musk oxen today, though it isn't the exact same tightly constructed circle that the oxen form. It nonetheless allows them to thwart incoming attacks, as one Nanosaurus finds out when it rushes forward and is bulldozed by a large bull. The standoff continues, and neither side relents. All the while, the blizzard worsens, and both sides are forced to rest. But once the snowfall reduces, the hunt is back on. One Pachyrhinosaur panics, and the rest follow suit, giving the hunters their chance. One tired male falls behind, and is forced to make his last stand. Defiant to the end, he fends off the predators as best he can, but as we cut to an overhead shot, we see them close in for the kill. As we see the Nanosaurus enjoying the spoils of the hunt, the episode concludes. The scene bears many similarities to footage of wolves that hunt large prey such as bison, and the segment makes no secret of it. The Nanosaurus are introduced with a distant cry similar to a wolf howl, and there is some indefinable lupine quality to them, especially in their eyes. A spectacular return to form, Iceworlds benefits from a fitting story structure, with the unfolding of the seasons being an effective way to frame the conflicts. Each segment revolves around a particular struggle that's specifically associated with the season in question, which also helps to provide a nice variety. The pacing is better, and there isn't as much of that feeling of segments being too short or underdeveloped. There's more focus and a strong visual continuity as well. It doesn't quite reach the heights of spectacle that we saw in Deserts, though you'd be hard-pressed to top battling titanosaurs. Still, what the episode lacks in visual spectacle, it makes up for with solid storytelling. Final rating, 4.8 out of 5. We've nearly reached the end of this so-called 5-day event, and fingers crossed they've saved the best for last. See you folks next time for Forests.